It was a chilly October night as I left my friend's house after watching the baseball playoffs. We live in a small town, so I decided to walk the mile back home instead of calling my mom for a ride. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed down the quiet street. The weather had been warm lately, but a cold front had moved in that evening. Wispy clouds drifted over the moon, making the sidewalks seem darker than usual. I tucked my chin into my collar and walked a little faster. About halfway home, I noticed the air getting thicker. The fog was rolling in, obscuring the houses and trees around me. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I don't scare easily, but walking alone in the creeping fog gave me the creeps. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued on, but when I glanced over my shoulder, I thought I saw a shadowy figure behind me. I spun around. No one was there, just a swirl of gray mist. Must be my imagination playing tricks on me, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The whole night felt eerie, like the setting of a horror movie. I laughed nervously to myself. Cool it, I thought. You've got half a mile to go. I picked up my pace, my shoes scraping against the sidewalk. The fog kept getting thicker, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of me. I strained to see through the gloom. That's when I definitely heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded muffled in the heavy air. No reply. The hairs on my arms prickled. I was getting seriously creeped out now. I turned back around and broke into a jog, my breath puffing in front of me. The footsteps sped up too, echoing off the pavement. They were light and stealthy, like whoever it was wanted to stay hidden. My heart started hammering. I sprinted, my legs burning, not daring to look back again. The footsteps stayed on my heels, inexorable, like they were toying with me. My chest tightened in panic. I saw the glow of a streetlight up ahead and raced for it. I didn't care that I was panting and splashing through puddles, making a racket. All I could think about was reaching that pool of light. Just before I got there, the footsteps stopped. I whirled around in the halo of the street lamp, squinting into the shadows. The sidewalk behind me was empty. No one was there, or if they were, the fog concealed them. I stood doubled over, trying to catch my breath. The back of my shirt was damp with sweat. As my heartbeat slowed, I felt totally confused and freaked out. What the hell had just happened? The fog swirled around the streetlight, almost like it had a mind of its own. I got the weirdest sense that it was watching me, toying with me. I shook my head hard, trying to clear it. I was letting my imagination run wild. But when I continued home, the feeling of being followed didn't go away. I constantly glanced over my shoulder and jumped at every little sound. By the time I got to my house, I was shaky and exhausted. I lunged up the porch steps and locked the front door behind me. Safe inside, I tried to convince myself it had just been my mind playing tricks on me in the gloom. But doubt nagged at me. All I knew for sure was I'd never walk home alone in the fog again. Not after that night. Something about the experience felt off, in a way I couldn't explain. Like reality itself had warped somehow. Like something had crossed over into our world that wasn't supposed to be here. Whatever had been out there in the fog with me was gone now. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to branches scraping against the house, I couldn't stop wondering. Had it actually left? Or was it only waiting for the next foggy night to torment me again? To finish what it had started. I pulled the covers up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut tight, but I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Not with that lingering fear that something sinister was lurking just outside my window, waiting for another chance to follow me home through the mist. I'll never forget that night. It was a Friday in October, almost Halloween. The leaves were all turning and the air had that autumn chill. I had just moved into this new neighborhood a few weeks before. It was a nice area, with lots of families and kids playing outside. Made me feel safe, you know. Anyway, I was home alone that night when the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw it was my neighbor from across the street, Frank. He was probably in his late 40s, living alone. I had met him once when I was moving in, but didn't know much else about him. He seemed friendly enough, though. When I opened the door, he was smiling wide. "Hey there, neighbor. I noticed your car was home and was wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner. I made way too much food and could really use the company." I hesitated. I still barely knew this guy. But I was new to the neighborhood and thought maybe this would be a good chance to make a friend. Sure, just let me grab my shoes," I said. "Wonderful," he said, smiling even bigger. "Come on over whenever you're ready." After he left, I wondered if I was making the right choice. But the neighborhood did feel safe, so I convinced myself I was just being paranoid for no reason. I headed over a few minutes later. Right away, something seemed off. The house looked completely dark inside. The drapes were drawn and not a single light was on. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Frank, it's your neighbor from across the street," I called out. Just as I was about to turn back, the front door creaked open. Frank's face peered out from the darkness. Glad you could make it. Come on in, dinner's just about ready," he said cheerfully, opening the door wider. I hesitated before stepping inside. "Do you have a power outage or something? It's pretty dark in here," I said, trying to sound casual. "Oh, the light bulbs must be burnt out. I'll have to pick some up tomorrow," he said. "Please follow me to the dining room." As we walked through the dark house, I couldn't help but notice all the furniture was gone. No pictures on the walls either. The place was empty. We got to the dining room, which was just as dark and bare. A single candle sat flickering in the center of the table, 2 places set. "Have a seat anywhere you like," Frank said. I sat down slowly, looking around the room. "Did you just move in or something?" I asked. "Oh no, I've lived here for years," Frank said from the kitchen. "It's just been a while since I've had company over." He came out holding 2 bowls of soup. He placed them down and sat across from me. I stared down at the bowl, the red broth reflecting the candlelight. "Go on, eat up. I made it fresh just for you," Frank said, slurping as loudly. I took a cautious spoonful. It was stone cold. "So, do you live here alone?" I asked, pushing the soup away. "Yes, it's just me now. It used to be my wife and I, but she passed away some years ago. Cancer." I nodded. "I'm so sorry to hear. And you haven't felt like replacing any of the furniture since?" Frank put his spoon down and leaned forward, staring intensely. "Why do you ask so many questions? I invited you for dinner. Let's just enjoy each other's company." I felt a chill go down my spine. His tone had changed completely. "You're right. I'm sorry. Just making conversation," I said. "This soup is really delicious." I forced another icy spoonful into my mouth. My heart was starting to race as I realized just how alone I was in this big, empty house with this man I barely knew. We ate in tense silence for the next few minutes. My eyes kept darting around the room, looking for a way out. "Well, I should probably get going," I said abruptly, standing up. "This was nice, but it's getting late and I—" "Sit down," Frank said in a stern voice. "We're not done with dinner yet." I hesitated before slowly sitting back down, my legs shaking. Frank stood up and grabbed my bowl. "Let me get you some more soup. Then we can have some real fun." He gave me a creepy smile and then headed back into the kitchen. As soon as he was gone, I leapt up and bolted toward where I thought the front door was. My heart pounded as I stumbled blindly through the dark house. Finally, I felt the front door knob and burst outside into the night, running straight for my house. I didn't look back as I rushed inside and locked the door behind me, chest heaving. I sank to the floor, trying to calm my breathing. Had I just imagined everything? Was I overreacting? Just then, my doorbell rang, making me jump. I crept toward the window and peered out. Frank stood on my front steps, staring right at me with that same chilling smile. In his hands were 2 fresh bowls of soup. Last night was the first time it happened. I was lying in bed half awake when I heard it, the soft, familiar voice of my grandmother calling my name. "Daniel," she said, barely above a whisper. At first I thought I was dreaming, but I opened my eyes and felt completely alert. The voice had sounded so real, so close. I looked around my dark bedroom, my heart pounding. "Grandma?" I whispered back. No response. She had passed away from cancer nearly 2 years ago, but at that moment it sounded just like she was there with me. Uneasy, I got out of bed and turned on the lights. I searched every corner of my room, even opening the closet and looking under the bed. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to convince myself I had just imagined it. Finally, I crawled back under the covers, leaving the lights on until I eventually drifted off again. The next night, it happened once more. I was reading in bed when that soft, familiar voice whispered, "Daniel," in my ear as clear as day. I flung around, gasping, expecting to see my grandma's kind face looking back at me. But again, there was nothing. The voice sounded so close, like she was sitting on the edge of my bed. But how could that be possible? I could feel my pulse racing as I got up and searched my room from top to bottom, just as I had done the night before. I even searched the rest of the small house where I lived alone. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the vivid sense that she had been right there next to me. Over the next week, her voice kept returning, always at night when I was in bed. Every time I would startle awake and search desperately for some sign of her. I never found anything amiss. During the day, I almost managed to convince myself it was just my imagination. But at night, her voice sounded so real. One night, about 2 weeks after it started, I awoke to the voice saying, "Daniel, I'm here." My heart leaped as I snapped on the light and saw the impression of someone sitting on the bed right next to me. The indentation quickly faded, but I was sure I had seen it. I tore through the house frantically, yelling, "Grandma, where are you?" Defeated, I slumped onto the couch, emotionally drained from the bizarre experience. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? Exhausted, I eventually fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I resolved to clean out Grandma's old room, which had remained untouched since she died. It was the one part of the house I always avoided. As I opened the door, the scent of her perfume wafted over me. It was the same perfume I had smelled in glimpses over the past few weeks. My hands shook as I boxed up her belongings, photo albums, journals, and favorite sweaters still hanging in the closet. I left everything else exactly as she had left it, not yet ready to erase her presence. That night, as I got into bed, a sense of dread washed over me. "Not again," I pleaded to myself. But sometime later I heard it again. "Daniel." My eyes squeezed shut as I pulled the covers over my head like a frightened child, but I could not shut it out. Her voice kept uttering my name, each time sounding nearer. "Daniel." The scent of perfume grew stronger, filling my nostrils. I felt the distinct sinking of mattress springs next to me as if someone were pressing down. "Grandma, stop, you're scaring me," I whimpered pathetically. "Please just leave me alone." The presence only seemed to grow stronger, enveloping me. I curled up tightly, wishing for morning light. I must have eventually drifted off because suddenly I opened my eyes to sunlight streaming through the window. Immediately I sensed something was wrong. There was a stillness to the morning as if the world were holding its breath. That's when I noticed the smell. Lilies mixed with sickly perfume hanging in the air. Heart pounding, I slowly turned toward the other side of the bed, already knowing what I would find. There she was, my grandmother's pale, lifeless body lying next to me, vacant eyes staring at the ceiling. Her floral nightgown was just as I remembered from my childhood. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped. I stumbled out of bed and collapsed to the floor, horror struck by the impossible sight in my bedroom. "No, please no," I moaned. But the corpse did not vanish or fade away like the fleeting signs before. She was truly there. Frantically, I ran from room to room, a scream caught in my throat, desperate to wake from this nightmare. I crumpled to the floor and broke down in convulsive sobs, smearing tears across my face. But nothing changed. She's still here at this very moment, on this quiet Saturday morning. I sat slumped against the hallway wall, too terrified to re-enter that room. All I can do is wait helplessly for someone to come and take her body away. "Grandma, why won't you let me be? Please just leave so I can have my life back." But in my heart, I know she never will.